During World War II, the Nazi officers and guards who ran the camp were hunted down, put on trial, and executed brutally right after the war ended. Some tried to escape justice, but most were eventually caught. Rudolf Höss was the mastermind behind Auschwitz, overseeing the systematic extermination of over 1 million people. Born on November 25, 1901 in Baden-Baden, Germany, Höss grew up in a strict Catholic household. His early life was shaped by his father's rigid discipline and deep religious beliefs, which instilled in him a strong sense of obedience. However, after his father died, his life took a different path. As a teenager, Höss was drawn into the nationalistic fervor of post-World War I Germany. At just 14 years old, he joined the German army and fought in the Middle East, serving in Turkey. The humiliating defeat of Germany and the harsh terms of the Treaty of Versailles fueled his radicalization. In the 1920s, he became a devoted follower of Adolf Hitler and joined the Nazi Party in 1922, long before Hitler's rise to power. By the 1930s, he was recruited into the SS, Heinrich Himmler's elite force, which would play a key role in the Holocaust. Höss was assigned to Auschwitz in 1940, and under his command, it was transformed into the most notorious extermination camp in history. At first, Auschwitz was meant to hold political prisoners, but by 1941, it became a core part of the Nazis' final solution. Höss approached his role with chilling efficiency, seeing mass murder as a logistical challenge rather than a crime. One of his most infamous decisions was the introduction of Zyklon B, a pesticide originally used to kill insects. Höss personally oversaw experiments to determine the most effective way to use this chemical for mass execution. By late 1941, Zyklon B gas chambers became the primary method of extermination at Auschwitz. The camp's crematoria were expanded to dispose of thousands of bodies per day, and transports of Jews, Poles, Roma, Soviet POWs, and other victims arrived regularly to meet their deaths. During his time in charge from 1940 to 1943, over 1.1 million people were murdered at Auschwitz. His reports to Nazi leadership boasted about the camp's ability to kill thousands daily with minimal cost. Unlike some other Nazi officials who claimed they were simply following orders, Höss showed no hesitation in his role. He was promoted for his efficiency and received praise from his superiors, including Himmler. Despite his position of power, Höss lived a seemingly normal life just outside the camp with his wife and children. His home, located near the gas chambers, was filled with luxuries, far removed from the horrors of Auschwitz. His wife, Hedwig Höss, later described their life at the camp as peaceful and comfortable, a stark contrast to the suffering endured by prisoners. As the war turned against Germany, Höss was reassigned in 1943 to help oversee other concentration camps. He briefly returned to Auschwitz in 1944 to manage the mass extermination of Hungarian Jews, during which nearly 430,000 people were killed in just a few months. By early 1945, with the Soviet army approaching, Höss and other senior Nazi officials abandoned Auschwitz and fled. After Germany's defeat in May 1945, Höss knew he would be hunted. He changed his identity using fake documents under the name Franz Lang and worked as a farmhand in northern Germany. His disguise was effective for a while, and he managed to avoid immediate capture. However, his past caught up with him in March 1946, when British forces acting on a tip from former Auschwitz staff tracked him down. The arresting soldiers, many of whom were Jewish survivors, did not treat him kindly. Höss was beaten during his interrogation and soon confessed in detail to his crimes. After being held by the British, he was handed over to the Polish authorities, where he stood trial in 1947. The evidence presented during the trial was overwhelming. On April 16, 1947, Höss was executed by hanging. His execution took place at Auschwitz itself, near the site of the gas chambers that had seen so much suffering and death. When Höss was reassigned in late 1943, Arthur Liebehenschel took over as commandant of Auschwitz. At first glance, some claimed that he was less brutal than his predecessor. However, this did not change the fundamental purpose of Auschwitz as an extermination camp. Under his leadership, the mass killings continued, and the carefully structured machinery of death remained in place. Arthur Liebenhenschel was born on November 25, 1901, in Posen, Germany, now Poznan, Poland. Like many men of his generation, he was shaped by Germany's defeat in World War I. He joined the Nazi Party in the 1930s and quickly rose through the ranks of the SS. By 1940, he was an important figure in the SS leadership, overseeing several concentration camps before being appointed as Commandant of Auschwitz in November 1943. Liebenhenschel's leadership style was somewhat different from Höss. Some prisoners recalled that he removed some of the severe internal punishments within the camp, such as the standing cells, a form of torture in which prisoners were forced to stand for hours or days in tiny spaces. He also reduced some of the power that certain prisoner functionaries had over others. However, none of these changes altered the overall reality of Auschwitz. The brutal policies of Nazi Germany remained fully in force, and the selections for the gas chambers continued. Trains packed with Jewish families, political prisoners, Romani people, and others deemed undesirable by the Nazi regime arrived regularly. During his time in charge, thousands more victims perished at Auschwitz, either in the gas chambers, through starvation, or due to forced labor and medical experiments. His role was clear: to ensure the camp functioned efficiently and to carry out the orders passed down from higher Nazi officials. Even if his demeanor seemed less aggressive than Höss, he was still a key figure in the Holocaust's machinery of death. When Nazi Germany fell in 1945, Liebenhenschel was eventually arrested by American forces and was handed over to the Polish authorities. During the trial, evidence was presented that showed his direct involvement in the day-to-day operations of Auschwitz. Testimonies from survivors, documents from the camp, and records of orders given by the Nazi leadership all played a part in building the case against him. The trial took place in Poland at a time when the country was working hard to document and understand the full extent of Nazi atrocities. The court examined every piece of evidence available, including the administrative records of Auschwitz that had been kept even during the worst days of its operation. Liebenhenschel's own record as a camp leader provided clear documentation of his involvement. In 1948, after a careful examination of the evidence, the Polish court found Liebenhenschel guilty of crimes against humanity and war crimes. The sentence handed down was death by hanging. His execution was carried out swiftly, and it marked the end of a man who had been part of a system of terror and genocide. Maria Mandl was another figure feared at Auschwitz. As a high-ranking SS officer, she held absolute power over the women's section of the camp. Her cruelty was legendary, and survivors recalled her as a merciless figure who took pleasure in the suffering of others. Unlike some guards who merely followed orders, Mandl actively participated in the selection of prisoners for execution, sending thousands to their deaths with a simple gesture. Born on January 10, 1912 in Munskirchen, Austria, Maria came from a simple background, but her ambitions led her to join the Nazi Party as Adolf Hitler rose to power. In 1938, she entered the concentration camp system as a guard in Lichtenberg, one of the early Nazi camps. She later served at Ravensbrück, a camp specifically designed for female prisoners, where she quickly earned a reputation for her ruthless treatment of inmates. Her efficiency and strict obedience to Nazi ideology helped her climb the ranks. In October 1942, she was transferred to Auschwitz, where she was put in charge of the women's camp. This was a promotion that gave her significant authority over thousands of female prisoners. From that point on, she had the power to decide who lived and who died. At Auschwitz, Mandl's cruelty reached its peak. She enforced strict discipline and used extreme violence against prisoners. She was known to personally beat and torment inmates, and she had no hesitation in sending people to their deaths. One of her key responsibilities was overseeing the selection process, where prisoners arriving at Auschwitz were divided into groups. Beyond her physical brutality, Mandl also took a disturbing interest in psychological torment. She helped organize the infamous Women's Orchestra of Auschwitz, a musical group made up of female prisoners. Now, this orchestra was forced to play cheerful tunes as prisoners were marched to their deaths. Mandl also seemed to take pleasure in punishing prisoners in creative ways. She created a special block, Block 25, where women who were chosen for execution were held. Once selected, prisoners were crammed into the building with no food or water, sometimes for days, as they waited for the gas chambers. Under her leadership, it is estimated that at least 500,000 women were murdered in Auschwitz. In the end, Maria, like many other Nazi officers, tried to escape the consequences of her actions. However, she could not hide her past for long and was caught in Austria in 1945 before being extradited to Poland. In 1947, after a lengthy and detailed trial, the Polish court reached a verdict. Maria was found guilty and was sentenced to death. Dr. Josef Mengele was one of the most infamous figures of Auschwitz. His name became synonymous with horror due to the gruesome medical experiments he performed on prisoners, particularly twins. Josef Mengele was born on March 16, 1911, in Günzburg, Germany, into a wealthy and respected family. His father, Karl Mengele, owned a successful machinery business, giving Josef a privileged upbringing. He was a bright student and developed a keen interest in medicine and anthropology. He went on to study at the University of Munich, earning a doctorate in anthropology in 1935, and later a medical degree in 1938. His academic work focused on genetics and heredity, subjects that aligned closely with Nazi racial theories. Mengele's strong belief in Nazi ideology led him to join the SS. He began working at the Institute of Hereditary Biology and Racial Hygiene, where he studied genetic differences between races. In 1943, at the height of World War II, he was assigned to Auschwitz. It was there that he earned the nickname, the Angel of Death. At Auschwitz, Mengele had a dual role. He served as both a camp doctor and a scientist conducting brutal medical experiments. His position gave him the power of life and death. When trains full of prisoners arrived at the camp, Mengele was often present at the selection ramp, deciding who would be sent directly to the gas chambers and who would be kept alive for forced labor or experiments. His most infamous experiments involved twins. Mengele was obsessed with understanding hereditary and genetic traits, believing that by studying twins he could unlock the secrets of human reproduction and race. He would separate twins upon arrival and subject them to horrifying procedures, including blood transfusions between twins to observe their reactions, chemical injections into their eyes in an attempt to change their eye color, surgical procedures without anesthesia, including amputations and organ removals, and forced infections with diseases to compare immune responses. Those who survived the experiments were often murdered so that Mengele could dissect their bodies for further study. Twins who died were sometimes dissected together to study differences between them. Beyond his work with twins, Mengele performed other cruel experiments. He injected poisons and diseases into prisoners to observe their effects, conducted sterilization experiments to test methods of mass sterilization for Nazi racial policies, and performed shock experiments by exposing prisoners to extreme temperatures to study hypothermia. Unlike some SS officers who exhibited visible cruelty, Mengele often appeared calm and polite, which made him even more terrifying. Survivors recalled he would smile and greet them cheerfully before sending them to unimaginable suffering. When the Soviet army advanced towards Auschwitz in January 1945, Mengele fled westward. He was briefly captured by American forces, but managed to hide his identity by discarding his SS uniform and adopting a false name. Since the Americans were primarily looking for high-profile Nazi leaders at the time, Mengele was released. Realizing that he needed to disappear, he escaped to South America, where a network of former Nazis and sympathizers helped him evade justice. His journey took him first to Italy, where he obtained false documents through the Vatican's so-called rat lines, a system that secretly helped former Nazis escape Europe. From there, he secured passage to Argentina, arriving in 1949. Argentina, under President Juan Perón, had become a refuge for many Nazi war criminals. Mengele initially lived in Buenos Aires, where he continued to practice medicine under an assumed name. By the 1950s, he felt secure enough to stop hiding completely. He even ran a business and lived comfortably. However, in 1960, everything changed. Israeli intelligence agency Mossad captured Adolf Eichmann, another high-ranking Nazi official in Argentina, and secretly smuggled him to Israel for trial. This sent a shockwave through the Nazi fugitive community, and Mengele feared he would be next. He fled to Paraguay and later Brazil, constantly moving and changing his identities to avoid capture. Despite his efforts to remain hidden, Nazi hunters, including Simon Wiesenthal, never stopped searching for him. In the 1970s, the West German government issued a warrant for his arrest, and rewards were offered for information leading to his capture. For decades, Josef Mengele remained one step ahead of his pursuers. However, his life in hiding was not as glamorous as some might think. He lived in isolation, constantly fearing betrayal. On February 7, 1979, while living in Brazil, Mengele suffered a stroke while swimming at a beach near Sao Paulo. He drowned and died at the age of 67. His body was buried under the name Wolfgang Gerhardt, another false identity he had used. For years, rumors persisted that Mengele was still alive. His death was only confirmed in 1985 when investigators exhumed his remains and conducted forensic testing. The results proved beyond a doubt that the man buried in Brazil was indeed Josef Mengele. The series of post-war trials that were held in Poland were known as the Krakow trials, which involved 40 individuals who had played active roles in the operation of Auschwitz, including SS officers, camp guards, and others involved in the mass killings. Out of these 40 defendants, 23 were sentenced to death, while the remaining individuals received long prison sentences. These trials marked one of the first significant efforts by Polish authorities to address the crimes committed during the Holocaust and to document the brutal realities of life at Auschwitz. The background of the Krakow trials is rooted in the immense suffering and loss experienced by Poland during World War II. After the Nazi occupation, the country was left with deep scars, and the memory of places like Auschwitz was still raw. The Polish government was determined to ensure that the world would not forget the systematic extermination that had occurred, and that those responsible for these crimes would not escape punishment. In this context, Polish courts set up special tribunals to investigate and try war criminals. The trials in Krakow became a central part of this effort. Even after the main trials, Nazi hunters continued searching for Auschwitz officers who had escaped. Many were found hiding in Argentina, Brazil, and other countries. Some were put on trial decades later. Others, like Mengele, died before they could face justice.